Hey everybody, I'm Alex Dykes, and this is the 2022 Subaru BRZ. Until Subaru gives us an all-new WRX, the BRZ is the pinnacle of Subaru performance. Now this was co-developed with Toyota, as was the first generation BRZ when it launched for the 2013 model year. For 2022, Subaru hasn't given us an entirely new BRZ, and for me, that's absolutely not a problem, because there weren't too many things wrong with the old BRZ, and almost all of them have been fixed with the new BRZ. At first glance, the BRZ seems like an unlikely vehicle for Subaru. This is the only one in the lineup that's not all-wheel drive. It's also the only one in the lineup that's not overtly practical. It doesn't have a huge trunk. It doesn't have a hatchback in the rear. It doesn't have massive amounts of ground clearance. Now, when you dig a little bit deeper into the BRZ, you'll notice a few things right away. I think Subaru is one of the only car companies in the world that could build a vehicle like the BRZ to begin with, and really the only one that could build a BRZ affordably. The other thing you'll notice is that there is way more Subaru going on here than there is Toyota, even though there's a Toyota logo right there on top of the Boxer engine. That Boxer engine itself is one of the reasons that Subaru is one of the only car companies that could build a vehicle like this, because Subaru and Porsche are really the only car companies out there producing Boxer engines in volume. There are pros and cons to every engine design out there. The main benefit to a Boxer engine design is that it's very flat, and that means that the center of gravity is very low. The center of gravity in the BRZ is right about here, and that's because the top of the engine is right about there as well. The only things that stick up from this level are the alternator, which is well above the engine, the air intake manifold, the air cleaner, etc. The engine itself is quite low in the vehicle, and that was possible because Subaru has Boxer engines available. They didn't have to design a brand new one just for the BRZ, and that makes a lot of sense. This is essentially a 2.4-liter four-cylinder Boxer borrowed from the Ascent and then tweaked for use in the BRZ. The first thing they did was take away the turbocharger because that would have added extra weight and complexity. It also would have changed the character of the vehicle, but obviously, if you want to turbocharge this yourself aftermarket and possibly violate your warranty, then go ahead, because this engine is definitely going to be able to do that. From the factory, this produces 228 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque. That is a pretty big bump over the previous generation model. And more importantly, the torque happens nearly 3,000 RPM lower. This is mated to a 6-speed automatic or a 6-speed manual transmission, your choice, and you'll get 22 to 25 miles per gallon combined, depending on the version that you get. The engine itself is mounted almost exactly on top of the front axle, a little further rearward than we find the Boxer engines in most Subarus. That gives us a little bit closer to a 50-50 weight balance, but Subaru says that even though they could have pushed this further back, they chose not to for driving characteristic reasons. They wanted this to be a little bit more predictable, and that meant putting 53% of the weight up front. A lot of folks have been asking me, is the new BRZ a refresh or a redesign? I would say you can call it whatever you would like, because they've done a lot more work to this vehicle than the typical refresh, but not quite as much as you'd see in a full, complete, clean sheet redesign. Now again, that's not a problem for the BRZ, because there wasn't really much of a problem with the previous generation model, but what Subaru decided to do was tweak just about everything to make it better. So we have a slightly lower roofline. They've pinched the cab in a little bit. They've relocated the seats. They've altered the floor pan of the vehicle. We have the new engine, tweaked transmissions, etc., but the wheelbase is still the same, and we have about the same kind of legroom as before. So this is still a solid 2+2 vehicle. 2 passengers, and a driver and passenger, I should say, comfortably up front, and then 2 passengers in the rear. Don't have a lot of headroom going on, but it does have 2 seats. That's 2 more seats than you'll find in an MX-5. We also have a hood that's a little bit longer than before, and a front bumper that's a little bit longer, but the engine bay is largely the same. This doesn't happen too often, but Subaru actually went into great detail about the differences between the BRZ and the 86. One of the differences is that we have a slightly revised front suspension, so we have aluminum knuckles rather than steel components in here. We also have a slightly different rear suspension design. The 86 uses the same design of the rear suspension as the previous 86. This one gets a revised one with some bits borrowed off of some other global Subaru products. One thing you'll notice, however, we don't get the massive upgraded brakes that we did find in the previous generation BRZ. I would expect those to come a little bit later, or you could logically swap those same components right into this vehicle, because the geometry of the suspension and the tire wheel there, etc., and the brakes is basically the same as the outgoing model. That means it should be a pretty easy upgrade. Like the previous generation BRZ, we still have relatively narrow tires for a performance vehicle, just 215 width tires, although you can get Pilot Sport 4s in this vehicle if you want something that's a little bit grippier. Logically, you could also fit wider tires to the vehicle, but that would alter the character, especially out on the track or out on the autocross course. And that's exactly what this vehicle was designed for, was a really tight track, an autocross course, etc., where you can experience rear-wheel drive dynamics, deliberately get the rear end broken loose easily, and that's also why you'll find regular all-season tires on the base model, the Primacy MXM4s, as I recall, although I don't have that example to show you today. Moving around to the rear, we find a ducktail spoiler that they say gives us as much lift as the small wing that the previous generation had on it. Restyled full LED taillights, dual exhaust tips down there at the bottom, and definitely a clean, elegant look. I like the fact that we have this black stripe that runs right there from one tail lamp module to the other. On the inside, we find a new seat design. It's definitely wider in this area right here, the shoulder area. So if you have broader shoulders, this is definitely going to be more comfortable than the outgoing model. But they still have retained very aggressive side bolsters on the seat bottom cushion and on the seat back cushion to really keep you centered in the seat. These two have been redesigned versus the outgoing seat to make everything more comfortable, support your legs a bit better as well. This is still a very relaxed reclined seating position. It feels like I'm almost on the floor, and if I put the seat all the way down, it is in fact closer to the ground than the outgoing seats. They let you lower the seat a bit more. That's because they lowered the ceiling. Now, speaking of the ceiling, this is one of the few vehicles where me, at 6 feet tall, I can actually sit in here with a helmet on. Admittedly, I have to be a little bit more reclined than I might like, but I can be in here with the helmet on a track. And that's something that I really cannot do in the MX-5 or a wide variety of other performance cars, oddly enough. In fact, I was recently at an event driving the Lexus LC500, and I could not comfortably fit in the LC500 with the helmet on, and I have absolutely no problem here in the BRZ. The BRZ is a 2+2 vehicle, so we do have two tiny back seats back there, but I think most folks are probably going to keep them in this folded position because that makes this quite cargo practical. Even though we only have 6.3 cubic feet of storage space back there in the cargo area, enough room for about 4 of these 22-inch roller bags. As you can see, you could definitely put a lot more cargo if you have that rear seat area folded, and that's going to make this an awful lot more practical than the MX-5. According to Subaru, one of the design criteria for this vehicle was to be able to store 4 spare tires and wheels back here along with the helmet, and that is definitely something that this cargo area has enough room for. If you want to use the rear seats as seats, you should know that there are only 4 seat belts in this vehicle, so just 2 right back there. There are child latch anchors and top tether anchors for both seating positions, but it could be just a little bit of a squeeze for anybody in a booster seat because some of those older children may end up hitting the ceiling with their heads. I definitely cannot fit right back there. We do have fixed height shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, also height adjustable headrests. You can tell by the red stripe in the upholstery that this is the limited trim. There's also some red contrasting stitching on the side. The center of the seat is an imitation suede material. It's definitely very attractive and breathes well. Moving over to the front doors, we find more premium materials than we found before, with more of that imitation suede up there at the top of the door. My one concern with imitation suede in a vehicle like this that's daily driving is that it doesn't seem quite as durable as some imitation leather products or real leather, so definitely keep that in mind. You may need to be a little bit more careful with this interior. Moving over to the dashboard, we find a reasonable amount of soft touch plastic, so we have soft touch upper section right there. But as you'd expect in a vehicle of this price point, we do have harder plastics lower on the dashboard. Pretty decently sized glove compartment right there. I had no problem fitting a large tablet computer inside. In the middle of the dash, we have the latest Subaru Infotainment Software. The 8-inch LCD is standard on all trims, so you don't have to work your way up to the limited trim in order to get it, and it does support Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but it doesn't have factory mapping. We have 2 large air vents just there above it, the engine start-stop button below, and then standard 2-zone automatic climate control. There's definitely a lot of standard equipment in here, which I really like. We have a gated shifter. This is one of the only gated shifters I can think of in a Subaru. Let me know if I'm wrong about that down there in the comment section below. This really seems to be the only nod to Toyota on the interior, is this gated shifter design, because everything else about this interior, whether you're looking at the BRZ or honestly the Toyota 86, is very, very Subaru. We have toggles for the heated seats right there. Basically drive mode buttons over here, traction control off, sport, snow, track. This changes around whether you get the manual or the automatic. More red stitching going on right there. A single cup holder. I happen to have a smartphone in it. And then 2 cup holders right there underneath that section. This is also where we find the USB inputs for the infotainment system. On the driver's side, we find a partial LCD instrument cluster. It changes its theme based on whether you're in the regular mode or in the track mode. And it also changes a little bit whether you're in sport, just the color of that ring right there in the middle. Now you notice that over here on this side, we do have a tire pressure warning light. That's because this vehicle has pre-production wheels and tires on them without the sensors. So that's not an error in the vehicle. But you'll notice over here on this side, we have a lane departure warning icon because this has Subaru's EyeSight active safety system with Subaru's telematics system. It's located in this module just above the rearview mirror. This gives you adaptive cruise control, lane centering, and of course the SOS functionality as well. Moving back to the steering wheel, we have a round 3-spoke design with really narrow spokes. This is a great looking steering wheel. Big paddle shifters on the back for the automatic transmission model. Obviously you wouldn't get those in the manual. And the cruise controls are down here on a stalk. Although I'm now out on the road in the automatic transmission-equipped BRZ, I've actually spent most of my day with the manual transmission. And a lot of folks have asked me, which is the better transmission for the BRZ and of course the related Toyota 86? Let me try and answer that first. I would say it really depends on what you expect out of your performance vehicle. If you want the most reliable 0 to 60 time, obviously that's going to be the automatic. If you want the best 0 to 60 time, that could be with the manual, as long as you're willing to possibly roast your clutch a little bit and have a very aggressive start. According to Subaru, that model should go 0 to 60 in about 6 seconds even. The automatic is now going to be about half a second slower. The previous generation BRZ's automatic was definitely a lot slower, and they've fixed that by tweaking the automatic transmission for 2022, so now they're a little bit closer together. And as a result, choosing between the two for me personally would be a little bit difficult. I do love a manual transmission, and this is one of the best manual transmissions as far as an inexpensive vehicle goes. It doesn't feel agricultural in the same way that some inexpensive vehicles can feel, and there's certainly more shifter feel because of the way the vehicle is designed. This is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so if you get the manual transmission, it's actually shifting the forks there in the transmission. It's not connected via rubbery linkages, etc. So the actual shifter feel is better, I would say, than what we find in a Volkswagen GTI or a Honda Civic Si. But if you're the kind of person that's just starting out, you might want to get the automatic transmission because it could be a little bit more forgiving in autocross or on track situations, because the torque converter in there is going to help smooth out some of those power transitions. And it's going to be a little bit easier to break the rear end loose if you have the manual transmission model. Now, me personally, if I were going to buy a BRZ, it wouldn't be my only car, so I probably would get the manual transmission because it's quite simply more fun and more engaging. The BRZ, I think, is a little bit more engaging than the Toyota 86. A really handy touch is that Subaru actually highlighted some of the differences between this and the Toyota version of essentially the same vehicle. Subaru was a little bit more focused on lightweighting, so this has aluminum suspension components up front instead of all steel suspension components, and they also decided to tweak the rear suspension, something that Toyota decided not to do. According to Subaru, the change means that this has less body roll than the 86, and I seem to notice that out on the track. Now, admittedly, it's been 2 weeks since I drove the GR86, and I would really love to have these two vehicles back to back so I could do a more honest comparison. But based on what I have experienced so far, I would say it's believable that this has a little bit less body roll than that GR86. And I've also fiddled with the suspension spring rates a little bit, which is interesting. The front springs in this vehicle are a little bit firmer, and the ones in the rear are a little bit softer than the ones that we find in the GR86. And that all lends to the different character of the two vehicles out on the track. It's a little bit easier to break the rear end loose in the GR86. This is a bit more predictable, but both vehicles are definitely targeting understeer. So if you enter the corner, having a little bit more weight up front makes that handling more predictable. Again, this is baby's first track car, so keep that in mind. But because this can still send a reasonable amount of power to a single rear wheel in the rear, it has that limited slip differential back there, you can definitely break the rear end loose if you want to, in the automatic transmission model or in the manual transmission model. So if you start experiencing that understeer, you can start steering with your right foot, and that's exactly what this vehicle is about. This is about experiencing those rear-wheel drive driving dynamics at lower speeds, for instance, out there on the autocross course. And again, that's exactly what the BRZ is about. It's about the direct steering. This has a pretty quick steering ratio, but it doesn't feel twitchy out on the road. It's about the fact that you can daily drive this. There's enough room in the back for spare tires if you want to do that, so you can take your summer tires with you to the track, run those, and then put on more rational, more appropriate all-season tires for your daily commute. For my usual scores, you're going to have to wait until I can get my hands on one of these at home so I can run it through my usual battery of tests and comparisons, but it's easy to say that the BRZ is an absolute blast to drive on the road, on the track, on the autocross course, etc. And to prove that point, Subaru had me spend a great deal of time out on the track and out on the autocross course. Let's talk about the track first. You'll definitely notice that versus something like an EcoBoost Mustang or a Camaro V6 or anything with 300 horsepower or 400 horsepower, that this is going to be an awful lot slower around some of the average, I would say, tracks in the United States. So if you're going to Laguna Seca or Monticello or up here at Lime Rock out on the big track, those vehicles are going to be faster. Are they going to be more fun? That depends on what exactly you expect out of your performance vehicle. But when it comes to a tighter course, like the autocross course that they had to spend a reasonable amount of time on, I think this might actually be faster than some of those other options, especially some vehicles that have a little bit sluggish automatic transmissions. The automatic transmission in here is not the fastest shifting, but it is really good at holding gear ratios. So on a really tight track where you're really spending the vast majority of your time, say in second or third gear, this automatic transmission does a good job of just staying in that gear. And then the slowness of the shifts is not as big of an issue for me personally. And on that particular course, there were times with the manual transmission model that there's a lot going on, and maybe I would want third gear, or maybe I would want first gear, but it was just easier to stay in second the entire time because I'm a little bit lazy at heart. With the automatic transmission, in some of those situations, it will shift for you, but again, it's really good at sticking in that same gear that you need most of the time. Now, out on a bigger track, then I really wanted this to be a little bit quicker shifting, because then when going through the paddle shifters here, the slowness of the shifts was a little bit annoying. You will definitely find quicker shifts in something like a ZF8 speed. A lot of folks have given the previous generation BRZ a bit of a hard time for having skinny tires. 215 with tires, whether you get the performance tire or the regular tire, they're not terribly wide. But as I said earlier in the video, the tire size is all about the character of the car. The great thing about autocross is that the top speed on this little course here so far today has been about 46 miles an hour. I think I've hit 44, so I'm a little bit slower than some of the leaders here. But this is just so much fun because the risks are so much lower. Out on the larger track here at Lime Rock, I hit 109 miles an hour in that long straightaway, and going off the track at 109 miles an hour is definitely going to be riskier than going off the track here at that tricky corner right there at around 30 miles an hour. So the risk levels are just lower. I've now started a cool down lap, so that's why I'm going a little bit slower, but this is exactly the kind of thing that the BRZ was designed for. It was designed for weekend track day fun for people whose only car is the BRZ. Now, according to Subaru, more than twice the number of BRZ owners are single car households or single car owners. This is the only vehicle that they have. And if that describes you, then the risk of putting this into a wall at a really big track event on a really big track is definitely going to be higher than something like this. So at an event like this, you could carry an extra set of tires or wheels in the back with some grippy summer tires. You can have some fun on the weekend. And if you do go off into the grass here, the likelihood of damaging the vehicle and not being able to drive it home is an awful lot lower. Therefore, the cost is an awful lot lower. Choosing between the BRZ and the GR86, for me at least, is sort of like choosing your favorite donut. I love chocolate donuts. I love chocolate donuts with sprinkles, but do I feel like a donut with sprinkles right now or a donut without sprinkles? There are definitely going to be some flavor differences between these two vehicles, but the differences are pretty subtle, and I suspect you may need to drive them back to back to really get a good grip on those differences, especially back to back out on a fun winding mountain road or an autocross course if you have access to that. But aside from that, it's really going to come down to which logo do you prefer on the steering wheel, which dealer are you closer to, which service plan are you more interested in, because remember, all of these vehicles are built by Subaru. Clearly, there are two big selling points for the BRZ. Number one has to be the way the BRZ drives. This is an absolute blast to drive, whether you're out on your favorite winding mountain road or whether you're out on a track like the one that I'm on here with a lot of squealing going on around me. And I really love the fact that Subaru took me to Lime Rock to test drive this vehicle, because this is exactly the kind of track and the kind of autocross course that this car was designed for. I test drove the GR86 out on a much bigger track with much longer straightaways, and that's not the natural environment for this. It can feel a little bit out of breath at higher speeds, but on this particular course, this really shines. It's so much fun to drive. It's so much fun to get the rear end loose at lower speeds, especially out on an autocross course like the one that's out here at Lime Rock as well. And whether you're planning on autocrossing in a parking lot full of cones or out on a really big go-kart track like the one that I'm on right now, this is going to be simply the most fun you can have for the dollar. You could spend an awful lot more than this, not really have that much more entertainment. Now let's talk pricing. If you want to get your hands on a base trim BRZ, they'll be on dealer lots soon, and the sticker price is going to start at $27,995 before that pesky destination charge, of course. If you want an automatic transmission, that's $29,595. If you want a limited automatic, that's $32,495, and that is the most expensive way you can get your BRZ. So as you can see, the pricing window is pretty narrow, and even the base trim is very well equipped. It has the LED headlights, the LED taillights, a limited slip rear differential, which I think is a really nice touch. The LCD instrument cluster is standard, the 8-inch infotainment system is standard, as is 2-zone automatic climate control. The base version of the BRZ is going to be a perfectly fine vehicle for most folks out there. Now, if you want some of the more advanced active safety features, or you want the nicer interior that we find in the limited trim, like the one that I spent most of my time in today, this is a manual transmission limited trim, that's going to set you back a little bit more, but it still won't break the bank. It is still going to be significantly less expensive than a Supra, or the new Nissan Z, or most versions of the Mustang or Camaro that you might want to be cross-shopping. And unlike some of those larger vehicles, the BRZ is going to be more fun out on tighter courses. So if you're the kind of person that really wants to do a lot of weekend racing, really get into the sport, this is an excellent entry-level vehicle. It's going to be much better suited to that kind of thing than any version of the Mustang, to be perfectly honest. This is neater, it's tidier, it's smaller on the outside, it feels lighter out on the road, and it's certainly more connected to the driver. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and let me know what you think about the new Subaru BRZ. Let me know, would you get a BRZ or would you get an 86? I would love to have the chance to drive the two of them back to back, but I have to say I prefer the way the BRZ is tuned. It's only been about 2 weeks since I drove the Toyota 86, and my memory could be a little bit fuzzy, of course, but I like the way this feels a little bit better out on the track and most importantly out on the road, because this is also the kind of vehicle that most folks are going to have as their only car. So how this behaves on your daily commute is very important. Let me know what you think about that as well down there in the comment section. Find me over at facebook.com, Instagram, all those other social places, and I'll see you all next week.